Find someone accomplished, someone who's a leader in the field, but also someone who can engage an audience and someone who can convey a message in an innovative way. And Joshua Cabral is just that person. And I'm not going to read his entire bio because you can read it. You want to hear him, not me. But I do want to say that it's on page 35. And my favorite thing is that he works with, besides being a teacher for 20 years, French and Spanish, he works with schools in developing countries, notably in Nicaragua and in Haiti. How he came briefly to be our keynote speaker, he was actually a presenter at the Summer Institute that I chaired. And I was sitting next to him in lunch and I said, you know, we need a keynote speaker for our AC. Do you know anyone? You know, you're in the, and I was totally innocent on this. You're national, statewide, you do a lot of, and we need someone who's dynamic and people just are engaged. And as I was saying all these things, I thought to myself, Joshua, maybe you'd like to be our keynote speaker. And he graciously said yes. And he graciously did a 3-hour workshop as well as a 1-hour workshop, which is awesome for a keynote speaker to add that to their list. You can also visit his website, World Language Classroom. I'm there often, and I'm going to turn it right over to Joshua. So Joshua, please welcome Joshua Cabral for our keynote for the annual conference.
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I remember that conversation, and she didn't actually ask me at the Summer Institute if I would be interested.
Oh,
I think she was thinking it, and then I got an email from John after that, and I totally didn't think it was a setup.
It wasn't a setup.
And I wasn't thinking. I was saying like Bill Van Patten from Tea with BVP, and then to get the email from John, I was like, oh my God, I'm in the same league as Bill Van Patten. That's amazing. I want to do a quick plug for Jenny's webinar, because I'm a huge social media person, and I know she is as well, and that's how we know each other. Even though we've seen each other twice in our lives, we feel like we know each other. Like there are people in this room I feel like I know really well because I'm really big on social media and having this professional learning network, so big plug for that. And I also want to say, seconding what John said earlier about going to other states and coming back and seeing, oh, Nicefeld does a lot of things really well. Nicefeld does a lot of things really well. I did, absolutely. I was on the board of directors of the Massachusetts Association for 7 years. And one year our president came to the Nicefeld conference, and then she came back and did an hour-long presentation to the board about everything we could learn from the Nicefeld conference. So yes, Nicefeld does a lot of things really, really well. So, we're going to talk this morning about using languages to connect to the world, but I want to start, and I didn't get their permission at all, so if you see my parents, don't tell them to look at the video on the website. So, my mother in her retirement, she is an eBay seller. And if you know any eBay sellers, they talk about it a lot. And they want you to know where they bought it, how much they sold it for. And my father loves yard sales. And so he'll buy anything. And so I can remember being a child, and they would still buy anything. And one of the things they used to buy is old textbooks. And there was this bookshelf right outside the door as you walk like out into their kitchen. Well, it's their kitchen now. I lived there at the time, so I guess it was our kitchen then. But it had these old textbooks on it, and a lot of random foreign language textbooks, probably published in like the 60s. And I remember playing with those textbooks, and I would play school with them. And I was like 10. I had some willing friends that would play with it. Mostly I was alone. And I would play school using the textbooks from the 60s, where I would have my students repeat the verb forms, and then I would tell them to do the exercises. And when I was 10, in retrospect, I was a really bad teacher. I've come a long way. And so when anyone ever asked me throughout my entire life, like since that moment, if somebody said, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was always a teacher. Always, always a teacher. And I'm such a type A personality that once I decided that, it was never going to change. It was never going to change. So I think back to like when I was in middle school and high school, a lot of times, teachers would ask, what kids wanted to be when they grew up. And I can remember sitting in the Milton Hershey School where I went to high school in Hershey, Pennsylvania, in my life skills class, and everybody would say what they wanted to be when they grew up. You have the athletes, or if they couldn't be an athlete, they wanted to be sort of a sports agent, because that's the second thing when you can't be a professional athlete that kids say. Well, they wanted to be actors or artists, they wanted to be teachers and police officers and all of these things. And so thanks to Facebook, again a plug for the social media world, in preparation for today, I went through my list of friends that I connect with now on social media that I knew in middle school and high school to see what they were actually doing for jobs. And again, I'm the type A personality. I'm doing what I said I was going to do, but I think I'm the only one. So, and this was I just looked at like the first 20. Not that I have that many friends on Facebook, but so it was interesting to see that there's a social media coordinator, there's a sustainability coordinator, there is an educational consultant who does private college counseling, there's an entrepreneur, my friend Sarah, I went to college with her in France. She's now a professional organizer. She will go into your home and help you professionally organize your home or office space. She told me to say it that way, but I told her I wouldn't give you her website. But I can maybe talk to you about it later. There's a virtual translator, my friend Jessica. Let's see, there's lots of bloggers, a virtual assistant, an app developer, a solar panel installer, and a personal coach. I don't really know what that is, but I know that's what she has listed as her job. So I was looking at these and I was thinking, I don't remember them saying that at all 20 years ago. And the reason they weren't saying that is because those jobs didn't exist 20 years ago. Many of them didn't even exist 10 years ago. So in the language classroom, and I've done it, I'm with you. This is a moment of honesty. We have all asked that question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's a way of engaging vocabulary about what you want to be when you grow up. And thinking about how often that actually happens, unless you have my type A personality who decides at 10 and sticks with it. I think I want to offer you a suggestion to change this question from what do you want to be when you grow up to what problems need to be solved. Because in looking at what all of my virtual friends are doing now, they're solving problems that they found in the world. They're not necessarily doing what they said they thought they wanted to do. So they are solving problems in the world somehow. So when we put this out to our students, like many of the jobs that my former colleagues and friends are doing, those jobs don't exist yet. And our students are going to be the ones that create those jobs. So that's going to happen in a global world for the most part. So let's talk about this word global. It's a buzzword in education. And when it becomes a buzzword, it gets a bad rap. A little bit, right? It gets a bad rap. But that doesn't mean that it's still not valuable just because it becomes a buzzword. But as language teachers, we need to remain aware that the jobs that our students are going to potentially have and create for themselves are going to require doing them in a global society. And that will require that they not only have the language to do that with, but the cultural competence to do that with. Now, it's generally understood that language and culture are mixed. We'd agree with that. Language and culture, they're kind of intertwined, at least to some degree, or a great degree. So that learning a language will give students an insight into the culture of where the language is spoken. So it's nearly impossible to learn about a culture without learning some of the language that's needed to navigate inside that culture. So now the word culture and cultural competence, they're a part of our curriculum as language teachers for the most part, right? More so than in other subjects. Like we talk about the word culture, cultural competence, we use those words. Other subjects use global, but they're not saying culture and cultural competence. And even in the world of STEM, and now STEAM, which is moving in a good direction, hopefully we're connected into the STEAM somehow as it goes on, it's sort of assumed that that STEAM work is going to happen on a global scale. They're going to Skype with schools in other places. They're going to collaborate with schools in other places. But there's this unfortunate assumption that it's going to be done in the world of English, the lingua franca of the world, which is English. So what that does is it gives the upper hand to the native English speaker that's collaborating with someone for whom English is a second language. And so what we end up is not having opportunities to engage on the local level and understand where they're coming from when they're always doing everything on our terms, with our language. Because when we're using our language, we're also using our culture. So we need to give opportunities for our students to be able to engage with the language and culture, to be more effective, rather than just approaching everything from our lingua franca side. Now, this idea of the language-culture connection seems like it's something new. We've talked about culture, but in a very different way in the past. But if I throw the name Vygotsky out to you, does that mean anything? Oh, good. Okay, I see head shaking, right? So Vygotsky, he was like in 1920. He would not have called himself a linguist. He would have called himself, I think, more of a psychologist, or maybe even a sociologist. But modern linguistics uses him as, they use his research to talk about language learning and acquisition. But he actually said back in 1920 that language and culture are the frameworks through which humans experience, communicate, and understand reality. So this conversation has been happening, or people have been saying it and thinking it, but it hasn't really been that much a part of the conversation. How about Noam Chomsky? Mean anything to you? Okay, so Noam Chomsky, known for his theory of universal grammar. Yes, it's an amazingly brilliant theory, the language acquisition device, but his theory is actually called universal grammar. And even he has said that a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what community is. It's all embodied in language. This is the universal grammar guy. But we didn't notice that, because we've been seeing culture as the other thing you do. There's the day, Culture Friday, anyone? There's the day you do that, Culture Friday, right? And then the other days of the week. I love that we laugh at that because we realize we're doing it, and we're like, ooh, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be doing that so much. So that's why we're here, that's why we come together to have these discussions, right? So connecting to the world requires an understanding of different parts of the world, and language is our entry into those areas. Now, I've always found that speaking another person's language, one that's not our own, shows an incredible amount of respect and a willingness to honor our conversation partner. So it's often assumed that if you know something of my language, you know something of my culture. So you may be familiar with this Mandela quote, Nelson Mandela: if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. This speaks to that using English as the global language, as not speaking to someone's heart. And if you can connect with someone in their language and their culture, you're going to have a much more emotionally charged and connected conversation than if you do everything always on your own terms, right? So, though it's essential to learn about and understand culture beyond what the language itself might say, there are some interesting things about the language you speak, that we speak, that anyone speaks, that gives us some insight into their culture. This sort of turns into a chicken or the egg conversation. What came first, the culture or the language? Did the language influence the culture, or did the culture influence the language? So, for example, how relationships are constructed. There are languages that have very specific language, specifically Japanese, for example, that would have language that's used only by females. And then there's language only used by males in the same conversation. There is in languages where there are particular verb forms that are sort of gendered by person. And there are the languages that have formal and informal you. When is that used? Why is that used? Why is that valued, and why does that continue in a culture? I can speak personally from the time I spend in Nicaragua, where you don't even hear tú, you only hear vos, which is brings together, it's a you, the most informal you. So there's the usted formal you, there's tú, the informal you, but then there's this additional vos, which shows even closer relationship. And that is, it's something that is very important to their community. And they use it a lot to show that connection with people. Also looking at, so if a language is written from left to right, like English, or the Romance languages, we traditionally, for some reason, see that if you do a timeline, where is the past? On the left. And where's the future? On the right. And where's the present? In the middle. So if you take a language like Hebrew or Arabic, which is written right to left, where's the future? Where's the past? Does it follow that? So looking at things, so what came first? Did the culture influence the language, or did the language influence the culture? So there's a professor at Stanford, Lara Borditsky, and she looks at how the language that you speak actually influences your behavior. And it's kind of how you think. And she wrote a great article, How Does Language Shape the Way You Think? And in this article she said that language is central to our experience of being human. And the languages we speak profoundly shape the way we think, the way we see the world, the way we live our lives. I'm putting this all out there to show that language does not exist without a culture. It's used within a culture. It influences the culture, or the culture is influencing the language. But to separate them is nearly impossible. It's nearly impossible. And we've been doing that for a long time. And we need to bring together these, it's not even bringing them together, it's recognize them as one. Language and culture, recognized as one together. So traditional education, traditional cultural education in the world language class has focused on what's referred to as a functional view. That means from the outside. Where you learn about the holidays, the food, what people wear, maybe their political system, the geography of the country, functional view from the outside. Then there's a different way of looking at it, which is called a conflict view. Now don't misunderstand the word conflict here, because it doesn't actually mean like conflict. It's meaning that you see it from the inside. You're not standing from the outside and looking at the culture, but you're actually experiencing it from the inside. And when you experience it from the inside, you start to develop what we call your CQ. Now your CQ, and we know what IQ is, it's your intelligence quotient. There's even emotional intelligence out there now. But then we have the CQ. CQ is the new realm of cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence, which is defined as the capability to relate and work effectively across cultures. Now this isn't about knowing individual information about a culture. Not knowing what their political structure is. Not knowing what kind of food they eat, or what kind of holidays they celebrate, or how they, there's a lot of they involved in this, right? Whenever you do the functional view, it's always they. You're never there, you're never a part of it. It's never us, it's never my personal experience with it, it's always how they do it. But when you grow in cultural intelligence, you're speaking more about understanding the situation rather than about talking about what it is. So one key to developing a strong CQ. So when I say CQ, I'm not going to keep saying cultural intelligence. So CQ. I want to start using that a lot. Everyone, oh, CQ. Have you heard of CQ? Oh, CQ. What's CQ? We're going to say it all the time now, and it's going to be as normal as saying IQ. Oh, your CQ. Oh, you have such a strong CQ. Oh, how are you going to improve your CQ? See, I've said it so much now, it seems normal. Right? CQ. So a very important key to developing a strong CQ is understanding the concept of core and flex. So now core are those core principles that really define who you are. You know, it's the elements that won't change easily and that we don't even realize is something that's solidified in us. It's really the core that is our strength. It's kind of the solidarity of our core is our strength. Whereas our flex, this is talking in cultural terms now, are those elements that we can change if we choose to change them. That we can adapt to circumstances, to other people and other cultures. The fluidity of our flex is as strong as the strength of our core. So it's about finding what is our core that really makes up who we are as a culture, you individually in your culture, and what things can you sort of adapt to other cultures. Because assimilation would mean that you completely change your core. Whereas your flex means, I'm going to honor and keep my core understanding and socialization and culturalization in the world, but my flex allows me to experience and respect other cultures and to integrate in them, because those are the things that I want to integrate into my flex that don't necessarily change the core. So connecting to the world is about speaking in the language of the world, but additionally, it's about understanding how to engage with cultures that embody the languages that we're teaching our students. So when we ask our students to identify those problems, remember what problems need to be solved? They'll need additional languages, hopefully more than just one other. But they'll also need a strong CQ to effectively work towards solving all of those issues that we want to put out to them. So that's easily said. Oh, find the problems of the world and figure out how we're going to solve them. Well, how do you find those problems of the world? So there are many ways. You can walk down the street and find the problems of the world. So one thing that has worked for me is I have used the United Nations Millennium Development Goals. Now these goals were adopted at the Millennium Summit in September of 2000. It was the largest gathering of world leaders in history. And these leaders set out to a series of goals with a target date of 2015. So we can now see what happened during those 15 years. So if you're familiar with the development goals, they were put out to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, to achieve universal primary education, to promote gender equality and empower women, to reduce child mortality, to improve maternal health, to combat HIV and AIDS, malaria, and a variety of other diseases, to ensure environmental sustainability, and to develop a global partnership for development. So that was in 2000. 2015 came by, which was the target date, so they were revisited. What happened during those times, during those 15 years? And there was a lot of progress. They were able to actually quantify some of the progress. For example, there was a drop in extreme poverty rates over that 15 years from 47% to 14% across the world. There was an additional, the number of people with drinkable water went up by 2 billion. So there's definitely people working towards these goals, we're making them happen. Now we can't look at that and say, oh, job well done, and move on. Because clearly it has not all been solved, right? So there were some things that were overlooked in the original goals. So they have now developed, since 2015, these sustainable, you want to keep the same goals, but now let's make them sustainable development goals. And they're now considering things like there was civil rights were not in there anywhere. When you look at these problems, they're major issues to go after, but civil rights wasn't in there. Gender inequality is not in there. So in the new sustainable development goals, there's a heightened awareness of these issues that are going on in the world as well. And also, most of these goals were for impoverished nations. And the understanding was that the countries with money were going to help the countries without money. Whereas the new sustainable goals are much more for all countries, which is why you're seeing things like gender equality and civil rights, that aren't necessarily tied to economy. which these were. So these issues continue to be out there in the world. Now these are huge issues, but I want to think big for our students. They can start local, definitely start local, but I want to put it in our heads that these issues in the world, these are the global issues. And if we want to connect our students to these global issues, they're going to need language, and they're going to need their CQ. You understand what CQ is, right? I don't have to say it again? Okay, thank you. All right. So now let's talk a little bit real quickly about ACTFL and what ACTFL is doing about this culture stuff going on in the world right now. So sort of gone are the days, hopefully, or starting to go away, the days of that functional view, that outsider, they do this. That's the way a lot of textbooks do their little culture notes. They do this, they do that. I was giving the anecdote in my workshop yesterday morning about, it was a workshop about culture that I use with my students. It was something I photocopied from when I was 19 years old and I was teaching English in France about Thanksgiving in the United States and what everyone does. And in it, it was about, I don't know, it was 8 sentences maybe, a little culture note, and it was the most, nobody actually does that. It was a sort of a, it was in a, like a, they put everything together and they tried to make it look like everyone does it that way. And that's what happens with that functional view. So when I engage in conversations about culture with students, I start by having them all individually write what they did for Thanksgiving. I usually use this around Thanksgiving, after Thanksgiving. Some of them will write, my family doesn't celebrate it because we have political leanings or ideology that says that we don't do that. Some do, and they say where they go and what they do and the food that they eat. And then what we realize is if you have a class of 20, 30 students, no, they're all different. Like nobody's doing the same thing. If you go to your neighbor's house, like, oh, that stuffing's different than that stuffing. Oh, because we do this, because this one, you know, like, in my family, so I'm Portuguese, but also married into a Portuguese family, so everything has a Portuguese slant on it. So we always have, like, linguiça in our stuffing. That's how we do it, you know, and that would never show up in the culture note. That would never show up in the culture note. Like, and some people put linguiça in their stuffing. You know, no, it doesn't. Because as long as you keep it as they, you can assume they all do it the same way. But when you go into that culture and you have that conflict view, conflict just means difference. Think of it that way. That people are doing things in a different way, right? So back to ACTFL. So in 1999, ACTFL originally came out with the Standards for Foreign Language Teaching in the 21st Century. And then in 2013, we had the ACTFL World Readiness Standards. Now, in 1999, as part of the Standards for Foreign Language Learning in the 21st Century, ACTFL stated that, and sort of the mission of that, the United States must educate students who are linguistically and culturally equipped to communicate successfully in a pluralistic American society and abroad. So that was sort of the only mention of culture at that point. So it was just sort of, you know, make sure you talk about culture too. Just make sure you bring it up once in a while. You know, but it wasn't sort of very integral. Whereas in 2013, with the World Readiness Standards, it gets very specific and says that the standards are for learning language and to create a roadmap to guide learners to develop competence to communicate effectively and interact with cultural competence. So it's gone from language to talk about culture to language to actually engage with culture. So that's where we were sort of in the standards of 99, talk about culture. In 2013, actually engage with that culture, right? And this was another reason I love to come to conferences and do workshops, because I learned so much from everyone. But somebody pointed out in the workshop yesterday when we were talking about this that though it seems that it wasn't great in 1999, that was a huge thing in 1999 to even come that far. Because before it, there was nothing. So that was a huge step in 1999. And the thing is, ACTFL's not done yet. because the intercultural standards are soon to be coming out, which I'll talk about in a second, because that's what you're going to do when you're kind of living in a pluralistic global society. So if you look at some of the differences with the 5 C's, so communication. In 1999, it was to communicate in languages other than English. That was it. Good to go. That was good in 1999 with nothing before that. Now, the new 2013, it's so that you can function with the language. So you can actually do something with the language. And then the culture. So in 1999, the actual standard for cultures in the 5 C's was gain knowledge and understanding of other cultures. So basically, it was that total functional they. Big step in 1999. Bigger step in 2013, where it says interact with cultural competence and understanding with that culture. So ACTFL is on board with this. No, they're our mothership, so we have to look to them, right? So, and moving on with even with comparisons, cultures, communities, all of them. So if you want to go back to the 99 and kind of see where it's come, how far it's come, you can do that. But you'll see that it's gone to using language to actually engage with the culture rather than just talk about the culture, which has become sort of paramount to what we're doing as teachers. So now, as I said, ACTFL is going a little bit further now, or a lot further, and they will soon be publishing the can-do statements for intercultural communication. And I don't know if anyone has seen those. They were kind of sent out for teachers to review in advance and give their thoughts on them. So it's for actually using the language to engage interculturally, intercultural communication. So these standards will look at language needed to understand a culture as well as to engage with the culture. So I want to revisit this question of what do you want to do when you grow up? This question, in light of all this, seems very limiting. So you can only do the jobs that you have the vocabulary to say, or you can only do the jobs that you know already exist, right? So great way to practice vocabulary, have the conversation, but continue the conversation with, but beyond the things we already know about, what kind of jobs or work or things will we have to do in the future to address some problems in the world? So a slight change in this question, again, to what problems need to be solved, is a powerful way to get students working in that direction. Because they will come up with the innovative solutions that will require that they reflect on their core cultural practice and really push into their flex and use those tools that we will give them, which is language and a strong CQ. See, you're already saying it. Thank you very much. Right? And remember, CQ is not knowing about a culture, but it's knowing how to engage with a culture that is different from your own in a way that is respectful, validating, honoring, and reciprocal. That's a part that's also often left out, but you want it to be a reciprocal relationship. So that given that language and culture are so inextricably connected, or better yet, exist as a multifaceted identity, language learning is a highly effective way and really efficient way to reach out to the world around us. So let's provide our students with those tools. Another language. I'm hesitating to say foreign language, but another language, as well as the tools of engaging with another culture, so that we can move past those limiting beliefs about what they could possibly do and really authentically connect to the world with their languages. Thank you very much.